The food crisis in America has crossed a line. Not a gradual drift, not a gentle squeeze, a line. Because when a family of four can walk out of a grocery store, having spent $175 and come home with 2 days of food and no alcohol, no luxury items, nothing extravagant, just basics, something has fundamentally broken. We're going to talk about that today. But I need you to stay with me through this entire video, because what most people think is causing the food crisis in America, inflation, supply chains, maybe tariffs, those are real, but they are not the complete picture. Not even close. Here is what we know. Eggs hit prices nobody thought possible. Cereal that used to cost $2 now costs $10. A single Chick-fil-A order for one adult, a salad and a lemonade, came out to $30. $30. For one person. No meal deal. No family order. And people across the country are filming these moments in real time because they genuinely cannot believe what they're seeing. But here's what I want to ask you. What if inflation is only one piece of this? What if the food system in America is being squeezed by 7 distinct forces simultaneously, and at least one of those forces is something that major grocery corporations are actively working to keep you from understanding? That's what this video is. Not a rant. An investigation. We're going to go through every single layer, the data, the corporate behavior, the policy decisions, the technology being deployed in your local grocery store right now, and by the end, you are going to understand this crisis at a level that almost no one in your circle does. If that's the kind of content you're here for, real numbers, not just outrage, hit subscribe now, because that is exactly what this channel is built on. Let's get into it. Number 1. The real inflation numbers. It's worse than they're telling you. Here is the first thing you need to understand. When you hear on the news that inflation is cooling, that headline is technically true and practically useless for you as a grocery shopper. Because what they're measuring and what you're experiencing are two very different things. The Consumer Price Index, the CPI, is a broad basket of goods and services. It includes things like airline tickets, used cars, rent. When those categories come down, the overall number drops and the headline reads inflation easing. What that headline does not tell you is that the food at home index, meaning your grocery bill specifically, has remained stubbornly, painfully elevated. 25 to 28%. Think about what that means in practical terms. If you were spending $500 a month on groceries in 2020, you now need $625 to $640 to buy the same items. That is $140 extra every single month coming out of your household budget. Over a year, that is nearly $1,700 that has simply evaporated from your purchasing power, and wages for most Americans have not come close to keeping pace with that specific number. Now here is what most people get wrong about food inflation. Not all food categories move the same way. The headlines will average everything together, but the items that hit lower and middle-income households the hardest, proteins, dairy, eggs, cooking oils, have experienced dramatically steeper increases than the overall average. Eggs are the most extreme example. Due to a combination of avian influenza outbreaks and supply chain disruptions, egg prices at their 2025 peak were more expensive than most Americans had ever seen in their lifetime. There were months in early 2025 where finding a dozen eggs under $5 required actual effort. And then there is the split between food at home and food away from home, meaning restaurants and fast food. Both have gone up significantly since 2020. Restaurant prices are up roughly 30 to 35% over the same period. But what that means is the traditional cheap escape hatch of fast food has been shut. The person who filmed herself paying $30 at Chick-fil-A, she wasn't exaggerating. A Whopper meal at Burger King crossing $15 in many markets isn't an anomaly anymore. It is the new baseline. The economic logic of fast food, cheap enough that quality doesn't matter, has been destroyed. And with it, one of the only affordable meal options that working families could reliably reach for has quietly vanished. That is just inflation. And as I said, inflation is only the beginning. Number 2. Shrinkflation plus skimpflation. You're paying more for less of a worse product. I want to introduce you to two words that should be part of every American consumer's vocabulary right now. Shrinkflation and skimpflation. Because while inflation raises the price of what you're buying, these two forces are doing something sneakier. They're reducing what you're getting without changing the price tag. And in many cases, they're also reducing the quality. Shrinkflation is the practice of reducing a product's size or weight while keeping the price the same, or in the worst cases, actually raising it, This has been meticulously tracked by consumer advocates, and the examples are staggering once you start looking. Gatorade went from 32-ounce bottles to 28-ounce bottles. Same shelf placement. Same visual footprint. The label looks nearly identical, but you are buying roughly 12% less product for the same or higher price. Snack chip bags have quietly lost 10 to 20% of their net weight over the past 5 years, depending on the brand. The bag stays the same physical size, but the amount of air inside increases. 2. Paper towel brands have reduced sheet size or sheet count while maintaining packaging dimensions. Here's the math that stores are counting on you not to do. If a product costs $5 for 16 ounces and then costs $5 for 14 ounces, that is not a stable price. That is a 14% effective price increase, invisible unless you're calculating unit prices. Most people are not calculating unit prices at the grocery store. They're moving fast, they're budget stressed, and the packaging change was deliberately designed to be subtle. Now take that 14% invisible increase and stack it on top of the 25 to 28% visible increase in food-at-home prices. You are now looking at an effective total squeeze for many product categories that approaches 35 to 40% since 2020. That is not inflation. That is a systematic transfer of wealth from your household to corporate balance sheets. And then there is skimpflation. This is the third layer of the squeeze, and it is the hardest to see. Skimpflation is when manufacturers maintain the package size and the price, but quietly substitute cheaper ingredients. Cheaper oils replacing butter or premium fats. Lower-grade protein sources. More filler, less of the primary ingredient you thought you were paying for. Your frozen dinner looks the same. It costs the same. But the ingredient list has changed, and the caloric and nutritional density has been quietly reduced. The combined effect of price inflation, shrinkflation, and skimpflation means that your food dollar is being compressed from 3 directions simultaneously. And the corporations doing this are counting on the fact that most people won't notice, won't track it, and won't connect the dots. Pro tip: become a unit price shopper. The price per ounce or per unit is almost always displayed on the shelf tag in small print. It takes an extra 2 seconds, and it is the single most powerful tool you have against shrinkflation. And if you ever want to shock yourself, compare the unit price on your favorite brand today to what you remember paying, and the difference will make you want to sit down. But shrinkflation, as infuriating as it is, at least happens in the open. What I'm about to show you next is something happening entirely behind the scenes, and it involves your data. Number 3. How grocery stores are using your data to charge you the maximum you'll pay. Here is a sentence I want you to really absorb. The holy grail for the modern retail industry has been, and I am quoting here, what if we could charge every single person the maximum amount that we know they're able to or willing to pay? That quote comes from reporting on the grocery industry's embrace of AI-driven dynamic pricing. And what's happening in response to that goal is more sophisticated, more targeted, and more invasive than most grocery shoppers have any idea about. Let's start with what you probably think you know. Loyalty cards, your Kroger Plus card, your Safeway Club card, your whatever chain you shop rewards program, you probably know these track your purchases. You probably assume that's a fair exchange. You give them data, they give you discounts. Reasonable enough, right? Here is what you probably don't know. That data is being used to build a detailed profile of your price sensitivity, what researchers call your price elasticity. The system tracks not just what you buy, but what you compare before buying. It tracks whether you reach for the store brand or the name brand. It tracks whether you buy an item when it's on sale and skip it when it's not. It tracks your purchase frequency, your household size inferences, and it cross-references your zip code's median income data. And from all of that, it builds a score. A score that tells the retailer, this customer will pay more. This customer won't notice a price change. This customer is loyal to this brand and will buy it regardless of price fluctuation. And this customer, conversely, is so price sensitive that any increase will push them to a competitor. Now let's connect this to something you might have actually experienced. You go to a website, say an online retailer, and you're looking at a product. You see a range of similar products at different prices. You choose the more expensive one because you associate higher price with higher quality. The site logs that decision. Next time you visit, the algorithm weights your search results toward higher-priced options because it knows you'll select upward. Conversely, someone who consistently chooses the cheapest option gets served cheaper options. The algorithm rewards price sensitivity and taxes premium preference. This is already happening extensively online. What is newer and more alarming is the move into physical stores. Electronic shelf labels, which replace paper price tags with small digital displays that can be updated remotely and instantly, are being deployed in grocery stores across the US right now. In several European markets where they've been in use longer, retailers have already demonstrated the ability to change prices multiple times per day based on time of day, inventory levels, and customer traffic patterns. A 2024 investigation found evidence that data practices initially documented in gig economy platforms, specifically charging different rates to different workers or customers for equivalent services based on behavioral profiling, have structural parallels in how major grocery chains are beginning to use consumer data. What this means practically: two people standing in the same grocery store, buying the same item, and without regulatory transparency requirements, you would have no way of knowing this was happening. Counter moves that actually work: use your loyalty card but register it with a secondary email address. Occasionally pay cash for a full shop. Cash transactions cannot be behaviorally profiled. For online grocery orders, try clearing your cookies and searching in incognito mode before adding to cart. Prices sometimes vary based on browsing history. And whenever possible, calculate unit prices rather than responding to sales signals, because sale pricing in a dynamic system may simply mean the regular price for you specifically. This kind of pricing power doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists because a handful of companies control almost everything you eat. Number 4. Corporate consolidation and greedflation. The profit margin nobody is talking about. While you're standing in a grocery aisle doing math on whether you can afford a block of cheese this week, Kroger, the largest pure-play supermarket chain in the United States, reported approximately $2.6 billion in net earnings in fiscal year 2023. Tyson Foods, one of the largest meat processors in the country, reported profit margins that in 2022 and 2023 significantly exceeded their pre-pandemic historical averages. This is not a coincidence. This is a pattern. And it has a name. Isabella Weber, an economist at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, coined the term profit-led inflation, more popularly known as greedflation, to describe what she documented in corporate pricing behavior. Her argument, backed by corporate earnings data and pricing analysis, is that a significant portion of the inflation consumers experienced was not driven by input costs rising. It was driven by corporations discovering that inflationary conditions gave them political cover to raise prices beyond what cost increases actually warranted, because consumers were primed to accept price increases as inevitable. Here is the consolidation picture, and it is important to really understand the scale of it. The grocery retail market in the United States has consolidated dramatically over the past 2 decades. Estimates suggest that the top 4 grocery chains now account for approximately 65% of all grocery sales. And when you go one level deeper, into the brands on the shelves, the consolidation is even more extreme. Kraft Heinz, Conagra Brands, Nestlé, Unilever, PepsiCo, and a handful of other conglomerates own, between them, hundreds of individual product brands that appear to compete with each other on the shelf. The great variety you see at the grocery store, dozens of cereals, sauces, snack options, is largely an illusion of choice. You are often choosing between 2 products owned by the same parent company. When that parent company decides to raise prices across all of its brands simultaneously, there is no competitive pressure to resist that decision. The attempted Kroger-Albertsons merger, which the Federal Trade Commission moved to block in 2024, would have combined the first and second largest U.S. supermarket chains. The stated justification from Kroger's side was scale efficiencies and consumer savings. The FTC's concern was the one you'd predict: removing one of the last significant competitive pressures on grocery pricing. Whether or not you believe corporations are deliberately price gouging, and reasonable economists disagree on the exact degree, the structural reality is this: in a consolidated market, companies have both the motive and the ability to maintain elevated prices long after their input cost justification have passed. And that is exactly what the data suggests has been happening. But here is what makes me angrier than the corporate earnings numbers alone. It's not just what this does to your wallet. It's what it does to the most vulnerable people in this country. And we are going to get to them. Before that, let's talk about one more system-level force, because trade policy is reshaping what ends up on your shelf. Number 5. Tariffs, trade policy, and the hidden import dependency. How much of what you eat was grown or produced outside the United States? Most Americans dramatically underestimate this number. And understanding it is key to understanding why trade policy announcements that feel distant and abstract. The United States imports approximately 15% of its total food supply by value, according to USDA data. That number rises sharply for specific categories. Coffee is essentially 100% imported. The United States does not have a meaningful domestic coffee production industry. Fresh fruit imports account for roughly 55 to 60% of domestic consumption. Cocoa, which means your chocolate, is almost entirely sourced from West Africa and a handful of other tropical growing regions. Seafood, olive oil, specialty cheeses, vanilla, category after category, where your consumption depends on international supply chains that are exquisitely sensitive to trade policy changes. When a tariff is imposed on imported goods, whether it's a targeted action against a specific country or a broad import duty increase, the cost does not disappear. It moves. It moves from the importer to the distributor to the retailer, and it lands on the shelf price. This process happens remarkably quickly. Industry analysts typically estimate 4 to 8 weeks for tariff cost pass-through to reach consumer prices in most food categories. The tariff environment in 2025 has been particularly volatile. Elevated duties on goods from multiple major trading partners have added measurable cost pressure to food categories that were already stretched. And there is a layer to this that goes beyond what we import. Many American food products, domestically grown and processed, depend on imported inputs. Fertilizers, a critical input for virtually all commodity crop production, have significant import dependency. Packaging materials, processing equipment, specialized additives and flavorings. The idea of a purely domestic food supply chain is largely a fiction for most of the products you eat. Then there is the labor dimension. The USDA has estimated that approximately half of all hired farm workers in the United States are undocumented immigrants. When immigration enforcement intensifies, regardless of where you stand politically on that policy, it creates immediate labor scarcity in an industry that was already operating on thin margins. Labor scarcity means higher wages, which means higher production costs, which means higher shelf prices. This is not a political opinion. It is a supply and demand relationship. Pro tip: the food categories least vulnerable to both tariff disruption and labor enforcement are domestically produced and minimally processed items. Think U.S. dairy, domestic grains, legumes, and eggs from regional suppliers. The most vulnerable categories for continued price instability are tropical produce, seafood, premium cooking oils, and chocolate. Adjusting your shopping patterns even marginally toward the more resilient categories can meaningfully cushion the impact of ongoing trade volatility. And all of this, the price inflation, the shrinkflation, the data extraction, the consolidated corporate profits, the trade policy ripples. But there is a group for whom this isn't just painful. For them, it is a genuine emergency. Number 6. The SNAP coverage collapse, a crisis inside the crisis. Earlier in this video, we referenced the idea of food stamps. Someone asked on camera whether food stamps were even keeping up with grocery prices. I want to answer that question properly because what has happened to SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, over the past 5 years is one of the most underreported dimensions of this entire crisis. Approximately 42 million Americans rely on SNAP benefits to buy food. That is not a fringe number. That is roughly 13% of the entire United States population. These are working families, elderly people on fixed incomes, people with disabilities, and children, many of them in households where at least one adult is employed. Here is how SNAP benefits are calculated. The benefit amount is tied to something called the Thrifty Food Plan, a USDA model of how much a family needs to spend to eat a minimally adequate diet. For decades, the Thrifty Food Plan significantly underestimated real food costs, and SNAP benefits were chronically inadequate as a result. In 2021, the USDA undertook the first comprehensive revision of the Thrifty Food Plan in roughly 45 years, increasing average SNAP benefits by about 25%. That increase was genuinely meaningful. But then food inflation arrived. Here is the math that nobody wants to do. If SNAP benefits went up 25% in 2021, and food-at-home prices subsequently rose approximately 25 to 28% from 2021 levels through 2025, then the effective purchasing power of SNAP benefits in 2025 is essentially back where it was before the 2021 update, or potentially below it, once shrinkflation is factored in. The update gave people a rung up the ladder. Inflation sawed the rung off. $6 per person per day. In a food environment where a bag of tortilla chips approaches $8, where a box of cereal costs 10, where a pound of ground beef exceeds the federal minimum hourly wage in some markets, $6 a day to eat. And then there is the cliff effect, a structural cruelty baked into the benefit calculation. Because SNAP eligibility is determined by income thresholds, a person earning $1 more per month than the cutoff loses hundreds of dollars in monthly food benefits. This creates a devastating trap for low-wage workers. Taking an extra shift, accepting a modest raise, getting a small bonus, any of these can trigger a total loss of food assistance that far exceeds the income gained. The rational economic response for someone in this trap is to avoid earning more. This is not a character flaw. This is a system design failure. For viewers who may qualify for SNAP or know someone who might, eligibility has expanded somewhat in recent years, and a significant portion of eligible Americans, estimates suggest 15 to 20% of those who qualify, do not currently participate. The application process has been simplified in many states. It is worth checking. Feeding America, the largest hunger relief organization in the country, estimated that 1 in 8 Americans experienced food insecurity in 2023. That means difficulty affording food at some point during the year. In the wealthiest country on earth. And for many of those 42 million SNAP recipients and tens of millions of food insecure Americans, the problem isn't only the price. It's whether there's a store anywhere near them at all. Number 7. Grocery deserts. When the store simply doesn't exist. A food crisis is not only about what things cost. It is also about whether you can access them. And in America in 2025, millions of people face both problems at once: prices they can't afford, in stores they can barely reach. The term is food desert. The USDA defines it as a low-income area where a significant portion of residents live more than 1 mile from a supermarket in an urban setting. By that definition, approximately 19 million Americans live in food deserts. But here is what the definition doesn't capture. Food deserts are not primarily a rural problem, though rural food access is genuinely severe. Some of the most critically underserved food environments in the country are in the middle of major cities, inner-city neighborhoods in Chicago, Detroit, Baltimore, New Orleans, and Memphis, where the last full-service supermarket closed years ago and was never replaced. And here is the trend that should alarm everyone. Major grocery chains, Walmart, Kroger, Albertsons, have been quietly closing stores in low-income zip codes. The corporate logic is straightforward. Higher-income customers spend more, are less likely to use manufacturers' coupons. Low-income locations get the economics right: lower shrink, lower staffing costs, but they require accepting lower average basket sizes. When a major supermarket closes in a low-income neighborhood, what fills the gap? Typically, dollar stores. Dollar General and Family Dollar have become, by sheer location count, the de facto grocery infrastructure. Dollar General now operates more locations than McDonald's in the United States. And in many rural counties and urban food deserts, it is the only accessible food retail option. The problem is that dollar stores are not equipped to serve as primary grocery infrastructure. Their food offerings are overwhelmingly shelf-stable, highly processed, high-sodium, and nutritionally incomplete for family sustenance. Fresh produce is largely absent. Proteins are limited. And despite the dollar branding implying low prices, a family buying their weekly groceries exclusively from a dollar store pays an estimated 20 to 40% more per calorie. This is the corner store trap. You pay more for less nutritious food because the store with better options, better prices, better quality, better selection. And if you don't have a car or can't afford the transportation cost to travel further, the trap closes completely. The food desert problem is structural, entrenched, and getting worse. It is the end state of every other force we've discussed in this video. When price inflation, corporate consolidation, and demographic inequality combine in a specific geography, the result is that the most economically vulnerable Americans face the highest effective food costs per nutritional value. So here is where we are. Prices are approximately 30% higher than they were 5 years ago. The products in those packages have gotten smaller. Grocery chains are building behavioral profiles to charge you the maximum you'll accept. Corporate earnings have hit record levels during the same period consumers experienced record pain. Trade policy and labor markets have added structural cost pressure with no near-term resolution in sight. SNAP benefits have been effectively eroded back to pre-2021 levels by inflation. And for 19 million Americans, the store is simply gone. What do you do with all of this? I want to be honest with you about something before I give you the practical takeaways. A lot of food crisis content ends with tips like buy store brands and use coupons. Those are real suggestions. They genuinely help at the margins. But they are individual solutions to a structural problem, and I don't want to leave you with the impression that smart shopping alone is going to solve what we've been talking about. Because it won't. The system driving food prices up has forces operating at a scale that no individual grocery run can counter. That said, here is what you can do right now that actually matters. First, become a unit price shopper, not a sale price shopper. The unit price, displayed in small type on the shelf tag, is the only honest comparison point in a world of shrinkflation. Second, treat your loyalty card as a data relationship, not a discount gift. Use it strategically and register it with a secondary email. Third, investigate your local food ecosystem. Farmers markets, food co-ops, community-supported agriculture programs, and local butchers often provide better unit value than major chains for fresh proteins and produce, particularly as chain prices escalate. And then there is the systemic level. Because this problem will not be solved by individual consumer behavior. It will be addressed if it is addressed by policy. SNAP benefit adequacy tied to real food inflation, not a lagging government index, is a policy question. Antitrust enforcement on grocery consolidation is a policy question. Mandatory transparency requirements for dynamic pricing and algorithmic price discrimination are actively being discussed in the European Union and will eventually arrive here. Knowing these conversations exist and participating in them, with your vote, your voice, and your attention, it is the actual lever. The cost of food is not just an economic metric. It is a measure of what a society has decided its people deserve. Whether you're a parent trying to feed children on a stretched budget, a fixed-income retiree choosing between groceries and medication, or someone like the person in the video who described herself as fortunate and was still shocked by a $175 receipt, this crisis is real. It is documented, and it is not your fault. And it is absolutely worth staying angry about it. Drop a $sign in the comments, just a single. I want to see how many of us are in this together. Because I have a feeling the number is going to be significant. Before you go, next week, I'm going deep on something that connects directly to what we covered today. Because it turns out the food crisis and the health insurance crisis are not separate problems. They are feeding each other in a way that almost no one has laid out clearly for a general audience. The connection involves a specific economic mechanism that dates back to policy decisions made in the 1990s, and once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. Make sure you are subscribed, because that video goes up next week and it is going to hit differently after this one. I'll see you there.